Hey, how's it going, Champagne Sharks? Hope everyone's doing well. Just wanted to do some quick house cleaning, let people know. Go to champagnesharks.com and you get access to all the links related to Champagne Sharks. You can go there and find it all. And you can find where we are on social media, our products, all that stuff. Also, Patreon benefits, which includes Discord server, book club night, movie night discussions, show notes, newsletter, and most importantly, bonus episodes. So definitely become a patron for $5 a month at patreon.com/Champagne Sharks. And without further ado, here is the episode. Take care. Hey, what's going on, Champagne Sharks? This is Trevor, and we have with us, this movie was so amazing. We needed 4 people on the pod to review it. It's we have Michael R. Jackson.
Hey, y'all.
Mtume, and you're free to say more. If all you want to do is say hey y'all, that's fine too.
Wait, like more about the movie or more about
no, more about yourself and anything you want people to know about you.
I ain't nobody. That's what I have to say. I'm nobody. Who are you? That's my favorite quote. Emily Dickinson. I'm nobody. Who are you?
Okay, Mtume Gant.
I'm Mtume Gant, filmmaker, professor, talker. You know, that's what I'll give it. You know,
Richard Purcell.
Richard Purcell, same talker, professor. I profess.
All right, and Jason England.
Well, we got that Chappelle Show dynamic. It's rapping, bunch of niggas talking, bunch of talkers on the podcast. I'm Jason England. I've been on this podcast before, and I'm really happy to be back, especially in the company of these thinkers and talkers who I respect quite a bit. So I teach creative writing and nonfiction, and I've been teaching Erasure for over a decade. So I felt particularly invested in the film, but also I felt a sense of dread before going to it.
Did it surpass your dread, or was it a little bit better, or just about where the dread was?
I actually think my expectations were set appropriately low, and I was very forgiving going in because I'm not naive about what Hollywood does to films, right? There are sacrifices you have to make in service to profit in a broader audience. But I never anticipated that I would come out of the movie viewing it as a moral failing, you know, and that's where I landed.
Yeah, for sure. That I went in with my expectations really low, and then in the beginning was kind of surpassing my expectations, but still bad. But my expectation was so low that I was like, okay, he's not getting the book, but at least this movie is like kind of watchable. And then I spoke too soon. It went below my initial expectations about a third of the way through. I think probably when he changed the way, spoilers, but I don't know why I should say spoilers, because I think if you're going to click a review about something, you've pretty much forfeited that, but people complain. But anyway, spoilers, when they changed the way the sister died, that's when I knew, okay, I'm in for a bad time, because that was such an unnecessary change. I'm like, the only reason you could possibly have to change this to me is, I don't want to use this word lightly, but I just can't think of a better word, is like cowardice. There's a streak of cowardice that I think shoots through this movie, as in anytime something physical is going to be hard, not even just technically hard, but just emotionally hard, he just chooses the easier way. And one thing about the book Erasure that it's based on, I think we've all read it, is that's not somebody who, Percival Everett, you know, whether you like the book or not, I like the book. That's somebody who's clearly trying to challenge himself when he writes. And to have like a filmmaker adapt it who's clearly trying to make this easy on himself and the audience is very, very jarring.
And so I think I might be the only one on the podcast who had the opposite experience of I saw the movie first and then I read the book. And so I went in with kind of low expectations, but kind of just because I've been seeing so much like terrible shit recently, I kind of was like, what can this possibly be? And I went in with a low expectation. I got to the end of the movie and was like mad about it. Then I read the book, and then my like just base madness turned into like all-encompassing, fiery contempt, rage. I wanted to kill somebody. Like I was so upset when I read the book and saw like and reflected on what he had done to the story, the form, the content, all of it.
Richard, I want to make sure you get plenty of time to talk today, because I feel like the last time you were on the show, you got the short end of the shrift. So,
well, the last time I was on, it was just you and I. So, like,
the last time we were on a group show, I should say.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, I agree with Michael. I mean, I I've read the novel before. I've been teaching it for a long time in various classes I've taught, and but I agree in terms of the rage factor, precisely because, and Mike, you made a really good point. The form of the novel, it's an incredibly experimental novel, is just not matched by the movie. Like you could have made at least an experimental film, but instead, it's intensely conventional. Jason and I were talking earlier. It felt more like a televisual sitcom and a kind of melodrama than it did a kind of metafictional exploration about race, about family narratives. Like the novel itself really challenges the reader, and as we're all seemingly saying, the film does not. It refuses the challenge to the audience.
Yeah, I think one problem, a big problem with it to me, right? There's this thing that I think happens now, and I think it's in the age of content. Like I've been like stuck on this idea of content versus works. And in this age of content, there's this idea anybody can do anything, and I've got to be this multi-hyphenate and all this stuff. And he talked about how he got into directing and everything. And he said while he was filming the show Master of None with Aziz Ansari, there's plenty of articles. He tells a story to anyone who would listen, and I think it's actually not a good story, but he thinks it is. I'll read it right now. It says, Cord Jefferson says Aziz Ansari planted a seed for him to direct American fiction while filming Master of None. I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm just going to read the relevant paragraphs. He says, Cord Jefferson didn't always know he wanted to be a director. While working on Netflix's comedy series Master of None, actor/writer/creator Aziz Ansari asked Jefferson out of the blue if he ever wanted to direct. Jefferson recalls, I said, no, I've never been to film school. I don't know anything about cameras or lighting. That's not for me. And then he told him, dude, I went to NYU for business. I never went to film school. I've just been on sets and paid attention. All you need is to hire people who understand the technical stuff and then be able to articulate what's in your head. And I'm like, first off, why are you learning directing from someone who himself admits he didn't really know directing? I just feel like that's such a terrible attitude. But when you're adapting a work from somebody who's clearly a master at their field, like Percival Everett, to me, isn't someone who just, to me, treats writing as have an idea and just give it to someone else to do technical stuff. I feel like it needs someone who takes directing as seriously as Percival Everett takes literature. And I think that's the start of the disconnect. Like, I think he wanted the bragging rights of being a writer-director. It helps you for winning awards. It's, sounds like more like an auteur or whatever. And I think he wasn't ready. Like, as bad as it was with the way it adapted the work, just on its own in the vacuum, forget Percival Everett, just as directing, it felt like TV directing. It felt like, a journeyman came in and did an episode of a TV show with a script he was given, and that was it.
Well, it's funny because that story that Jefferson shares is something that's told to a lot of people who Hollywood wants to become directors. Some dude who is a showrunner or something like that. He talks, hey, you should direct. And then what they tell them is that, hey, just hire the right people. I call it the Ben Affleck school of filmmaking. Like, Ben Affleck has all the money to hire all these people to make his movies look pristine, right? And make his movies look Hollywood ready. But he doesn't really know that much about cinema in a real deep way. And Jefferson knows probably even less. So they probably told him that. And what he doesn't realize is that actually does expose him of just being part of the same kind of dry, hierarchical, strange thing that Hollywood is, where it's not really about art. It's about, you say, creating content, churning out stuff. And yeah, I mean, I read Erasure years ago, and it was strange because it was a book that I never thought would ever be adapted. I never thought about it. I never thought about it. I think I read it in 2008 or 9, and I remember it blew me back. I was actually going through a weird period. I was like, oh man, it messed me up. And then I became a big Everett fan after that. And I've read 4 of his books. I read his book Trees a year and a half ago. And I remember, and then that's when I discovered that Erasure was actually being adapted. I had saw that it was optioned, and I got a little nervous, but but I was like, maybe it's one of those options that won't happen because they happen all the time,
Yeah.
So when it got grabbed and put into this machine and this movie gets made, I am very curious at this person taking this thing and totally like just sucking the life out of it, to make a kind of Hollywood product. But it's like he got chosen to do that job, or it's also chosen because not like they were want to do this to Erasure in particular, but more like, hey, Jefferson kind of fits that mold. He is of that mold. He'll take these things, he'll make them right to where we want, and he'll be able to kind of hit the tones the way we need. But to me, when I hear him speak, or especially in that statement and other statements, I just see someone who is run of the mill, and the film is run of the mill, which is what's crazy. But with to me, I'll be curious what Jason gets to the moral failing idea, because what's really wild to me about the movie is the blandness is actually what he's saying we should be aiming for in Black cinema, which is crazy to me, which is an insane thought, that this kind of bland way he reinterprets the story of Monk and his family as this kind of like weak Kenneth Lonergan slash Lifetime-ish type thing happening is what we should be aiming
Lifetime
for.
has flavor.
You know what? I'm sorry. Lifetime, yeah. At least they got Eric Roberts acting buck wild. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know what? Let me not even do Lifetime like that.
Don't nobody talk no bad about my Lifetime.
I got you. I got you.
Also, Lifetime, I think, kind of knows what it is. My wife watches Lifetime.
Hallmark channel. Is that better?
Yeah, sure.
That's better.
Yeah, I never watched Hallmark, for sure.
Yeah, it's bad. But he makes that, and he makes that the ideal of what Black cinema needs to be. And then that's where, to me, because I had a similar experience. I'm watching the movie, I'm like, this is not good. This isn't good. And then there is a moment where the movie begins to show you what the ideal world is, and then I got enraged as well.
I got hot,
and I was not in a good place with it after that.
One thing I want to say in response to what you said that you feel like the film exposes him, and you gave a bunch of things that exposes, and that's actually part of my problem with this feeling of being gaslighted. Is I feel the opposite. I think it should expose it, but it actually doesn't. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh man, this is not going to be good as far as the response to it. And then I went and I looked around, and I'm like, again, another example of, am I the crazy one? Like all the way until the nominations were announced, but there were just so many people telling me, oh my God, that movie was pretty good. People I trust. And then I was like, really? Okay.
Same.
I meant it really exposing to like the analytical people. I'm with you too. Though I will say though, like I'm, Letterboxd being whatever it is, I always say I'm an avid Letterboxd user, and right now American Fiction is like my third, and I trash American Fiction. It's my third most liked review on the site. There's a lot of people who see through this movie. There's a lot of people who see it and they go, "This is some bullshit, dude. What is this?" And a lot of them who've never even read the book who see through it. They can watch the movie on face value and go, "Wait a minute, hold up. This don't smell right." So there is, I think, a strong section of people, but those people are not going to be given a platform to speak. And Jefferson, it's funny because you shared a clip to us, and I actually think Jefferson is becoming aware of the criticisms, because some of his little comments recently, I feel like are pot shots at people who are questioning the validity of how he presents the argument in the film.
Which clip? And I can play it into the stream.
Both of those, both sides when he's speaking, and the other ones, because I was like, why are they bringing it up in this way? Why do they feel the need to defend this vigorously? This idea that Hollywood is living in an era where we want to just do slave and thug movies and not black bourgeoisie dreams movies.
One thing that just really bothered me on a basic level when I watched the movie and then read the book and then reflected on the two pieces was the movie doesn't even really show you who the character is. And there's like an extent to which you can't do all of that because there's a lot of interior life happening in the prose of the book, but like because of the argument that he's making about what kind of representation should be shown versus what shouldn't, without really telling you what kind of writer Monk is, which he does extensively with the other book that he shows in the that he's writing, that he reads from in the novel, that you get a sense of who Monk is. Like, and Monk is kind of like an asshole. I mean,
Yeah.
but he's an asshole that I find relatable. Like, he's an asshole in the way that I'm an asshole, or
Yeah.
you are an asshole, or any of us are. And like, and I felt like in the movie, he's just sort of held up as like just having this reasonable gripe because his book isn't in the black section, or isn't in the white section or the non-black section of the bookstore. But because he does, and the movie never tells you really who he is, I actually walk away with thinking that the real problem he has is being associated with being black at all.
I have a theory about that based on his interviews, and I feel like the problem that he's kind of having is, I feel like Cord Jefferson, I don't know if he's like this with everything he writes, but he is with this, is he thinks Monk is him, or he thinks Monk should be him. And he can't separate himself from Monk, even to the point where I feel like Jeffrey Wright is even low-key kind of styled similar to just an older version of him. The bald head, the beard, the whole look. And I think because when I see him talk about himself, he's very guarded about himself, and really seems to very much curate his own image. Like, I think he wants to kind of hide in plain sight. He doesn't want to criticize himself, doesn't want to say anything remotely controversial or uncomfortable. By seeing Monk as his avatar, he kind of brings the same feelings to Monk. He doesn't want to interrogate Monk too hard because Monk has become his avatar, and he keeps saying it in interviews, like, I kept thinking this book was about me, or I was like, how did Everett, like, was he spying on me? I'm like, first off, this book came out in 2001, so how could he be spying on you, and not vice versa? It's just a weird way to even phrase it. Anyway, that's my theory as to the weaknesses of and the fear to critique Monk in this. But in a way, it actually makes him worse. The kind of Mary suing. I mean, it has fake critique of Monk with the whole listen to black women. But these type of people are fine saying that about themselves. Like, yeah, I learned that I need to listen to black women. That's one of those things like in the job interview. Like, if you ask me my flaw, I guess my flaw is I just work too hard, or it's one of those backhand.
I don't listen to black women. That's my flaw.
Yeah. I don't listen to black women enough, but I'm learning that I need to. That type of thing. You like fake flattering the interviewer.
I have a question because I haven't read the book recently, but Richard and Jason, you both read this, and Michael and Trevor. I never got the impression that Monk was even a great writer when I read the book. That was always a question to me when I read the book. Was he a great writer? Was he a great writer who wasn't finding his greatness? But the movie for me made it be like, no, he's this denied person.
Yeah.
And I remember when I had the conversation with Jared Ball, and Jared said his connection was when he watched the movie, he thought it was something like the great person's being denied. And I was like, Jared, no.
I definitely think Cord took that lesson from the book.
So I have to say that this is one of the things that, because I just read the book, like I made sure to finish it by the end of last year, or I finished it like on the 31st. And that's one of the many things that I found to be so profoundly brilliant about it was that he just showed you who Monk was as a writer in the moment. Like, he didn't have like a judgment on him. I mean, Monk had his own opinion about his own work, but like as a reader reading it, it wasn't like I read his actual writing and was swept away by it. It was like quite difficult to get through. But it was also literally what he was most interested in. It was his sort of obsessions with language and with space between words and all of that, all the stuff that's like, so to me, just as a fly on the wall, so esoteric and so sort of obsessive to the point of like kind of lunacy in a funny kind of satirical way is how I read it. And so this idea that we're supposed to lionize Monk as like this sort of like writer in the Mount Rushmore of writers, when like he could just be any sort of number of writers in a pile of books who just has had a career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Jason,
go
you
for
want to
it.
say something?
No, I see you about to talk. Go for it.
No, I'll just say this really quick. No, I think you're right. In the novel, Monk is as kind of marginal of a writer as a lot of the writers he's grouped up with. So in the novel, he's in the film, they go to this book conference, and this is where he sees Golden, and they have this huge, room where she's giving this talk, and he's this little room with these other writers. I think we're writing like historical fiction. In the novel, he's giving a talk to a room of writers, and he belongs to this thing called the Nouveau Roman Society. It's like, the new novel. They're all like esoteric, weird, experimental writers. And he gives this ridiculous talk, right, that is very impenetrable to the reader, but not to the audience. And it's kind of nonsensical. And he angers one of the audience members who gets mad and wants to and he get into a fight.
It's fucking hilarious.
Yeah, it's a really funny scene.
That was in the movie.
Right, exactly. And the point is, I agree with you, Michael, that in the novel, there's a level of self-loathing that Monk has about his own writing. Not because he doesn't think he's a good writer. He just understands that he's not being read, and he both has a kind of sense of pride in his writing because, he's a very learned, kind of novelist. But he also knows that there's a kind of irrelevance to all of it that is not in the movie. The movie there's a different kind of racial politics in the movie around representation, whereas in the novel, it's not that it's not there. It's just that these layers of Monk's personality around and the satire on his own self-loathing just are completely evacuated in the movie. You don't get any of that stuff in the movie itself.
There's three things there that I think you're all touching on that separates art from this sort of commodified smalls, right? And also that separates however you're portraying Cord Jefferson in his interviews. I haven't heard all of them. And Monk as the narrator. And one is interiority. The novel is so intensely interior and philosophical, and you have the weight of this incredibly heavy intellect on every page of Everett, right? And you just can't capture that in the movie. And I'm not even going to blame that on Cord Jefferson. That's why I think really bad or mediocre books make good movies, because they leave room for a director to play with. So most Cormac McCarthy, I don't want to see. No Country for Old Men, his most mediocre book. So of course, and the Coen brothers touch it, and then, won't take anything away from them. And they do what they do, and it makes for a more compelling movie because it's a mediocre book compared to his other stuff. This book's so interior that it engages your imagination, your intellect in such a way that what you see on screen is not going to work. Give him credit for that. But the other two I won't give him credit for. And that's art demands the risk of honesty and self-sorting. And what Monk is and what Everett is self-aware. And what Cord is full of himself when he talks. And that's very different. And there is no risk of honesty in this film. It feels quite a bit for me I don't know if anyone's read John Cheever. He has a great story called Goodbye, My Brother, about this upper-class waspy family that hates each other. And the opening line is something like, we are a family that's always been very close in spirit. And you immediately know how much they hate each other, right? And I feel like it's as if someone took Goodbye, My Brother and turned it into Growing Pains. That's what it feels like to watch there, where suddenly we have this made-for-TV family movie that kind of strips away all of the complexity and the moral quandaries that force the audience members, when you read the book, back on themselves. How do you contemplate identity? But it's not about white people in the book. To me, it's about how Black people contemplate themselves and each other, right? And so there's a great scene where he's in a waiting room for his sister's practice, and he sees a young, lower class Black woman there, and she starts to talk to him about it's Morrison Zorniel. That's who he's talking about. She's talking about reading these books, and he realizes that he had underestimated her intellectual capacity. And to me, that was a commentary not on the fact that we overrepresent ghetto stories or gangster stories, but that the people who think they have access to them, they underestimate the humanity and dignity of these lives. I think there's just a lot of moral cowardice that is so, I'd say, pointed, that it ceases to be cowardice and it turns into something that to me is cynical and diabolical. And so you have a white director in this movie that they play for laughs, where he's so cartoonish that I feel white liberals can actually be in on the joke and they don't have to feel complicit.
Yeah, they won't feel indicted at all.
No, but also the way he describes his films as genre pieces that are merged with real life pathos sounds not like something a white person does, but maybe what you would say Jordan Peele does, right? But the other thing is if Precious, these anachronistic targets, you update the movie in ways that are regressive, which is to say you strip out all the moral complexity, but you continue to have the same antiquated anachronistic villains or safe targets like Tyler Perry, right? But Precious and Push, if those are the targets, that wasn't a white author. It wasn't a white director. Those were not white producers. Those were all Black people who created that film. So I'm not sure what purpose the white director serves, except to give both the audience and the writer an easy way out, and also to excuse the writer. And the most despicable thing it does, and I mean truly despicable, like spit in someone's face for doing it, is it takes Juanita Mae Jenkins, the author of this sort of minstrel novel, and it not only gives her flesh, but it gives her a voice and a spot on a panel, and it puts her in conversation with Monk. And he finds out that in some ways they're simpatico, and he's ill-equipped to challenge whatever the fuck garbage word salad they throw at you in the denouement at the end, where it's like, she's like, maybe, well, I did research and maybe you didn't read the book and maybe it's like, wait, what the fuck? At that point, you've actually taken the book and you've cut its soul out. And that's just one of many things, is the fact that they keep playing for a joke that they once saw their father kiss a white woman. In the book, this man has an affair with a white woman who he really views as the love of his life, and he has a child with her. And his life is destroyed internally because he cannot be with this woman, either because of social constraints or his own expectations, and he's in a loveless marriage. And the mother doesn't just have dementia where she runs a bathtub until it overflows. She actually, I believe, tries to shoot the maid with a gun. And the maid doesn't necessarily like the family. And there's a class aspect that's been stripped out as well. And so by the time I came to the end of it, what I was reminded of was that really insipid talking point that I think, I can't remember, Rod Moreau, who I actually know, and I don't dislike Rod at all. I consider him a good acquaintance. But Rod once quipped on Twitter that straight Black men are the white people. Black people. Then I believe Damon Young ran with that and turned it into a column, and it spread throughout the internet, this sort of reductive, stupid shit, right? I came away thinking, all right, well, white people are the white people of Black people, one. But two, if there's a white people of Black people, I feel like I saw them and they made this film and somehow they were absolved of all guilt and complicity by the film. It was as if the film built in Juanita Mae Jenkins' character and neutered Monk in order to say, hey, all of these crimes we've committed artistically, the fact that we are well past what we could have done with the social and moral cachet we had post George Floyd, and all we've done is employ a managerial class, an empower managerial class that makes art that seems more like a Black Lives Matter lawn sign. That's for white people to say, here, I did this. I put this in my yard. I went, I saw the show, I bought the t-shirt. I am a good person, rather than provoke or challenge or advance us anyway. Seems so cynical as to actually make me angry enough to want to hurt somebody.
I want there's so many things you stated that each one can go into its own thread of conversation, and I figured two things. One, I want to give my answer to Mtume's question about, he wanted to know from people who read the book recently or who read the book often, what they thought about something. And then after that, I wanted to play, if no one had anything to say after that, a clip of the conversation with Centara Golden, which I think is something that you might have left out, that on top of everything else, he changes Juanita Mae Jenkins' name to Centara Golden. I think it's another example of the kind of cowardice. Like, I feel like he's just afraid of anything that might lead you to criticize him, that he's like, oh, wait, Juanita Mae Jenkins, that might sound too blackety black. Maybe someone will think we're making fun of Black women. Let's make it a more classy name, so supposedly.
Was he playing on an anagram of Sinatra?
What's that?
Was he trying to do some sort of anagram of Sinatra with Centara Golden? I'm
not sure. I won't be surprised if the whole name put together is an anagram or something. I don't know.
I had this feeling when he made that change that, like, if he kept it as Juanita Mae Jenkins, it Because I think I was telling either Mtume or Trevor, maybe both of y'all, that after I like read the book, I went back. I was like, let me actually look up an interview with Sapphire to like get a sense of just who she is as a person, what she's like. And it was interesting listening to her talk about Precious or Push back in the day and like get a sense of her. And her essence is not Issa Rae's essence on any level. And I had this feeling that like maybe part of the reason why he changed the name from Juanita Mae Jenkins to Santara Golden had to do with just wanting to make sure that he could misdirect you enough from what the actual source material that he supposedly was critiquing was. Because the more you look at that, the more his argument would start to unravel to the things that you're saying, that T has been saying about how these movies are not so common these days. So what are you actually talking about?
Yeah, I agree. I also think he is afraid, kind of similar to what you're saying, Trevor, of actually even having the argument that Everett was having back in 2001 with it. And I think because of Precious then becoming a movie, it winning an Oscar, the kind of way it sits in our kind of cultural space, I think he didn't want to step into that. So making it vague. I mean, look, when he actually dramatizes the novel, it's like an 8-minute thing in a room. And remember, in the book, it's
100 pages.
It's 100 pages, which I remember when I originally read that, I remember going through like the fourth page, like, is he really going to keep? Am I going to keep reading this? Am I going to keep reading this?
And what he needed to be able to do was to make a movie within a movie. But that's where you need to be a really good director, like a really seasoned, trained director. And I don't even train as in you have to go to film school, but even if self-trained, but you have a real dedication to the craft, you can do a whole different style of movie within
totally and like and this
would have to be the goal. It would have to be like the point of all of it.
Yeah,
right. And that's where you feel like people like Jefferson in this kind of conformist Hollywood, they shake hands because he doesn't want to do something that daring. He really truly doesn't, and they don't want something that daring. So he's
I'll say this real quick. I also feel that if he spends that much time fleshing out the fake movie, it'll betray too much that it's anachronistic. Like if he actually did, like say, 20, 30 minutes of a Get Rich or Die Trying or something like that, people might be like, honestly, when's the last time we've seen one of these? So I think it's another reason why he has to kind of get in and get out.
Right.
And also that would take away from the screen time he can dedicate to white people acting stupid.
Mm.
When I saw the screening of this movie, I was at a screening where he did a talk back afterwards, and the delight that these people in this audience and the moderator had a feeling like it was like they'd gotten like a tongue bath up their fucking asshole, like after they saw that movie, because they got to laugh at Michael Cera Crichton and the other person being these like bumbling white fools that they're just so used to seeing in a lot of these new black bougie black works. And it just blew my mind.
Really quick, I mean, I want to say two things about this because I love this part of the conversation. One of the things about the novel within the novel, My Pathology, and this is one of the kind of other things that sacrifice with the disappearance of interiority. And also this is making me think about, Jason, the point you made earlier about the scene in the abortion clinic that is in the beginning of the novel when he meets his sister and he meets this woman who's talking about reading Gene Toomer and Kane and all this stuff, is that part of the satire in the book and part of the cynicism, the darkness, the dark comedy of the novel is that what you realize when you get to the end of Erasure is that the whole book is about a repetition of a story. It's about a Black character who has a fraught relationship with their father and if you boil it down, right? That monk story and Van Gogh story. So, Van Gogh is the protagonist of My Pathology are not that dissimilar, right? So at the one hand, he's trying to kind of take down this kind of stereotypical kind of like mix of Native Son and Boys in the Hood. But then Monk's own story is not that dissimilar from that.
Like his id.
That's exactly right. Right. And so the movie takes all that out and then poses this kind of like Boys in the Hood-esque, gangster narrative with like realism of like bourgeois middle class Black life, you know? And so the only way to achieve that is to create these polar opposites, as opposed to in the novel where like Everett's challenging us to understand that these stories are kind of repeating themselves over and over and over again, even in places that like seem to be experimental. Like you still have the same story being told over and over again, right? Because even that scene in an abortion clinic is precious. I mean, like he's not, I mean, a push. Like he's kind of playing very subtly with these stereotypical narratives and showing how they're kind of close to other real life, you know, and that's the challenge he gives to the reader in the novel. But the movie kind of just strips all of that out and creates something very pat.
Rich, the irony of all of that is talk about representation.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that. Like if that's all you cared about was the representation, you get a million representations within that novel.
Yeah.
I think, Rich, you're hitting on something really important, which is what Everett gets is that the narratives are the same because the narrative's always the same, right? Like there are 5 songs that people write and 7 plots of movies and books. The question is always one of integrity of purpose, right? And that's what he's saying. And the movie seems to miss that and say, well, it's whether or not you have the appropriate sort of Blackness, which was not Everett's point. It's also, again, in terms of misrepresenting, and this is where I think we betray something that I think we all know about Yaqub. I'm saying that in jest partially, but white people are going to go to this movie and they're going to critique this movie and they're going to miss the point because they're always going to miss the point because here's the secret. And I think it's something that they know the same way we know. And they being the Cord Jeffersons of the world, white people don't give a fuck one way or another. The whole point is I'm going to this show because this is what the brother with the somewhat edgy haircut and the safe voice told me was the thing. I'm gonna show up and then I can talk at the cocktail party about it, right? So they don't care about whether or not this is accurate and the message is sending, but it is completely inaccurate in its portrayal of some significant things. One is the modern publishing world. The head of the National Book Awards for many years was Lisa Lucas, a Black woman. She then took herself to one of the major publishing houses and got her own imprint where she's signing people for plenty of money, right? This is like these tropes of the white people in the room for the awards, ridiculous. Black people have been running a train on the grant, fellowship, and award system over the past 5 Black excellence years, right? And I don't say that,
what an image.
I don't say that judgmentally. White people did it for many years. It was codified, so it was less obvious. So I'm not mad about that. Hey, take their money if you can, but let's not pretend that that's what's happening now. Thirdly, the villains. If we were going to be serious at all about who's villainous in terms of exploitation of Black experience right now, we would talk about creatives masquerading, not brand ambassadors masquerading as creatives, and corporate mascots and shills masquerading as activists and public intellectuals. Those would be the targets today. That's something that you would be able to explore in a movie like this if it had even half of a testicle, right? And it doesn't. It doesn't touch on any of that.
I mean, and that's why I've said from the very beginning, this movie is just cover. It is literally cover for Black Hollywood, the Black bourgeoisie in Hollywood, to create various straw men, to coddle the white people that have accepted them into the fold by saying, we know your racism is just a lack of sophistication. We know that's your issue. It's nothing more than that. We know your lack of sophistication. So give us places where we can step in, teach you with a wet noodle how to treat us correctly. Give us the movie so Jeffrey Wright can go win an Oscar and we can go walk down with Meryl Streep and so on and forth, and we'll be fine. Do that. It's just cover. It's just cover because they need to create a narrative. It's funny. I was talking to someone the other day, and he was saying, remind me that everything is narrative. Everything is narrative. Israel has a narrative. That's why they're using it to, mess with the Palestinians the way they are. Everyone has a narrative. The black bourgeoisie and Black Hollywood need a narrative to stay in power and to keep us saying, you know what? It's really important that we all go out and watch Origin right now. And this movie is like part of it. It is literally their attempt to hit a home run for us to go out and say, you know what? That's right. Let's all go celebrate American fiction. This is our plight, and it's bullshit.
There was this I mean, you all know the Stephen Colbert White House Correspondents' dinner, and one thing I remember about that dinner, was he went in on the press for going easy on George Bush. And the thing that was funny about it was at the time, the media, this is after 9/11 kind of died down and there was no need anymore to pretend to like George Bush. The weapons of mass destruction narrative started falling apart. So that small window where liberals were as gung-ho and war hungry as Republicans kind of passed. And they were back to hating George W. Bush. There was even a term for it, Bush derangement syndrome. And watching Stephen Colbert take the press corps to task for going easy on George Bush, and everyone acted like it was so brave and he was speaking truth to power. But, I always said, like, if you look at the response to it, I think there's only one guy, I think at the Boston Globe, who actually seemed to take offense or was defensive about it. But they all loved it. And I'm like, for something that's supposed to be taking down the press corps for being so soft on George Bush, going easy on him, why do they love it? And media people and journalists are some of the most thin-skinned people on the planet. So if this was really coming at them, they would be livid and hate Colbert forever. But that was the start of Colbert's time as a media darling. And what I had realized is that they hated George Bush. They already were attacking George Bush all the time. But by fake critiquing them and pretending that they weren't, he got to basically give them license to do more of what they've already been doing by pretending that they haven't been doing it. And that's why they loved it, because now it's like, you know what? He's right. We're not bashing him enough. And I feel like this does the same thing for the black bourgeoisie. Like, we're going to be fake underdogs. We're going to be fake erased. Like, they're pretending that they're the erased ones. Like the title of the book is called Erasure, and I think I can only speculate because he doesn't explicitly say why it's called Erasure. But I think Monk feels erased, the type of writer he is. But how is Cord Jefferson and Issa Rae and Tracy Ellis Ross and Sterling Brown? How are any of them erased? Like, they're winning. They are the mainstream of black fiction now. And it's like, just like, Colbert had to pretend that the press corps was being suppressed and not allowed to critique Bush or not critiquing Bush enough. So, oh, you quiet mice, you have to actually speak up now when they've been like bashing him day in, day out. It's a freedom to double down. Cord Jefferson is like, he's doing Watchmen. He's getting all these glowing accolades, and white liberals love him. There's no white liberals saying there's too much Cord Jefferson out there. They can't get enough of him. They give him everything. Issa Rae, everybody loves. Sterling Brown is and everything. Blackish, was loved by white people. It wasn't like, say, Girlfriends, which is Tracy Ellis Ross, original big work, which I think is more of a black famous thing. She doesn't really do black famous stuff anymore. She does white famous black work. And they're all going through this fake outsider, fake underdog, dog and pony show that's just basically self-advertisement, like, give us more work. Let's pretend, let's all play this game that we're not the winners now. And the two things this is most compared to, which is Bamboozled and Hollywood Shuffle, are both outsider works. They're both underdog works. And it feels weird to say that about Spike Lee, because people kind of remember him or think of him as like, the establishment Negro now, and he had, a studio deal. But people forget how controversial Spike Lee used to be, and it was considered a huge snub what happened to Do the Right Thing. Maybe one of you remember, but was it even nominated? I know it didn't win, but I don't think
it was nominated for one award. I think it was Best Director.
It wasn't Best Picture.
Yeah, I mean, and that's when, was it Sally Field or somebody went up there and said the Best Picture isn't nominated this year? It was famous that a white actress. I can't remember who it was. I think it was Sally Field said, the Best Picture was not nominated this year.
And Siskel and Ebert kept railing about it on their show and in their articles, like how terrible it was. And when Spike Lee went into Bamboozled, he kind of had that outsider spirit, even though he was kind of in Hollywood. He kind of felt like he wasn't really there. And Robert Townsend was really on the outside. You know what I mean? Like he was struggling with the roles he was given and everything. And yet Cord Jefferson is not an underdog like they were when they made those things. It's fake. It just drives me fucking nuts that he's sitting there pretending that he's in the position that they were in and saying the same thing when he's actually taking shots at old movies. And this is a quick thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to let whoever was jumping in go in. But there's an excerpt he had here that I think was typical. He's going around and in the hotel room, right, when Monk is watching the TV shows and movies, they're showing 12 Years a Slave, which was from 2013, Get Rich and Die Trying, which I think was from 2006. And I'm like, his premise is so full of shit. He can't even use recent examples. Like he can't pull up a movie from less than 10 years ago because it's a lie. Like if he tried to give examples with new movies and somebody tried to say, oh, well, maybe he did that because of rights. I'm like, what do you mean rights? He could have got the rights to something if it existed. If all these recent, but this is what he said, and then I'll be done. This is the answer to an interview he had in Slate. He goes, I mean, this is a conversation my friends and I have been having for years. Look, movies like 12 Years a Slave are important. I love New Jack City and Django Unchained. Oh, Boys in the Hood is on? Let's watch it. The important question needs to be asked. The question I'm asking now is, why is this stuff being made to the omission of everything else? He adds, why is this what we focus on solely, he uses the word solely, when it comes to what's deemed pristine Black art? Why is it always a tragedy and misery, abuse and violence, cross burnings and lynchings, shootings and murder, and death and drugs? Why has Black life become reduced to just that on screen? And I'm like, okay, your examples are New Jack City, which is from the 90s, Django Unchained. Does anyone know when that's from? I know it's from a while ago.
Like 2015, something like that.
Okay, and then Boys in the Hood, which I think is like 1990. So 1988, 1990, 2013, and 2015. Those are the 5 examples those are the best examples. Like your examples are undermining your own point. You can't come up with anything below because it's bullshit, because you are the lack of nuance in Black art right now. The professional class, the Black professional class with assimilation anxiety.
And the interesting thing is that he actually could find some more recent examples, such as Underground Railroad.
But those would be his friends.
To do that would also undermine him, because that kind of content also has that Black bourgeoisie sort of filter running off.
Yeah. They're made by the so-called solution to the problem, the Black excellence class. So he can't call them out.
Really quick, I want to go back to the examples you use of Bamboozled and Hollywood Shuffle. I mean, with Bamboozled, Spike Lee is drawing from 2 of the most kind of, one very comedic and one not so much, satires of media from the 60s and the 70s, which is Network and The Producers. When The Producers came out, people wanted to kind of charge Mel Brooks because, the whole Springtime for Hitler, like kind of making fun of fascism in a way. And, the whole premise of that film is very much a part of Bamboozled. And you can tell that Everett is kind of drawing from that with My Pathology, this kind of like over the top, grotesque satire of something in the most offensive way possible. And what was great about Hollywood Shuffle, to your point about like the meta cinematic parts of it, like that was a film about films. And so, you had the Black Acting School skit, but then you also had the great the movie review, the kind of Siskel and Ebert kind of parody when they're like they're looking at movies. But the funny part of that whole bit is that the one movie that they love is the most stereotypical movie. It's the what was the name of it?
The black pimps, the black vampire
exactly,
pimps.
Exactly, like the zombie pimps, exactly. Like there's a kind of level
bitches.
Yes, like
it's that walk he had.
Yes. There's a level of kind of introspecting and satire of like Black cinema and Black taste that's in that movie. That, again, if that's the reference point for Cord Jefferson in this movie, like all of that is stripped out. I mean, even if you think about the 80s and 90s, people, I grew up watching Living Color and loved the Wayne Brothers stuff. Like a lot of the skits on that show, and even like Don't Drink Your Goose in the Hood, CB4, there's a string of like truly satirical Black films, whether they're great or not, it's a different story, that seem to turn that critique inward. That I feel like one thing that we're all talking about is how this film in particular, but even just like a lot of the films that are coming out in this moment don't have that kind of self-critique through satire. And this film just abandons it completely.
And another thing that just not to forget the fact that I get really irritated when he is comparing himself to Townsend and to Hollywood Shuffle, because Robert Townsend had to like max out all his credit cards to like make that
God.
Yes. And it took him like, and he had to like start film parts of it and stop. It took him like 2 years to film that movie. So like no one could have been more like outsidery to make a movie about what it was about than him. So Cord and doing this like Hollywood thing is like it's like apples and orangutans, you know?
Yeah, and it's funny because after watching American Fiction, I had to rewatch Hollywood Shuffle just to kind of as like a palate cleanser. I was like, let me just grab this movie and watch it. And the thing that I'm always reminded of is the lead character that Robert plays is so naive, and it's about the destruction of his naivete about Hollywood. So it becomes this self-critique. Like the scene where he's like envisioning himself as like Superman is actually sad because he still actually hasn't fully come out of the dream world of this aspirational nature of what being a Black actor in the Hollywood machine does. And then at the end, the whole post office sequence like lives in this strange kind of dissonant irony, and it's working on so many levels that I'm like, Jefferson, did you watch Hollywood Shuffle? Like, did you watch it? Like, when he speaks, he's a very much like a reference baby when he like is in his interviews. Oh yeah, I saw this movie. I dropped this movie. He knows how to name drop and word drop.
The end of that movie is a reference to the player.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude,
he watches, but he doesn't understand. He doesn't see.
But my thing with the player is the player at the end of the player by Robert Altman is the most cynical ending of Hollywood I've ever seen.
Ever.
Basically, the executive wins and he gets the woman. He gets everything. It basically says Hollywood is a place where you'll get chewed up, murdered if you're not willing to chew up and murder.
Right.
And I'm like, come on, bro.
Something else with the player too is it's very telling that he likens Monk, the writer, to Tim Robbins' character, the executive, more than he likens the Adam Brody actual suit kind of thinking director to Tim Robbins. Like it's very telling to me that Monk's analog in the player to me is Tim Robbins. You know, like how corporate he kind of views art. It's also betrayed in Centaura's gotcha speech and how it ends. It feels like one of those movies like The Firm, one of those Tom Grisham plots where the guy gets away scot-free but pits all his enemies against each other. You know what I mean? Like everyone who's after him, he manages to outsmart all of them and get away. And in the final scene of him and the person playing the slave nodding at each other like we're in the same fight. Like, get the fuck out of here. What? You know, you are part of the problem. You're not that different than the white director. In a strange way, he seems kind of betrayed that he knows that. The fact that he and the white director, despite the so-called lightweight skewering the white director got, the white director who he works with to finish it off and work through the he doesn't go back to the people, to like, you know, real Black artists and say, you know, how can I salvage the mess I made? He doesn't go back to the community. He goes to the white gatekeeper and they work together to solve the problem. And somebody told me, oh, but it's meant to be a critique of Monk. But from what I've read, I don't see it that way. It's kind of meant to show that Monk absorbed Centaura's cynical lesson and gave the market what it wanted. But on the inside, he's fucking it up, you know, or he's doing something vague and
essentially what he grabs from the player. I'm just gonna say it really quick. The reason why he thinks it's like the player, what he grabs from the player is Tim Robbins' intelligence is able to outwit everybody. So he's basically saying Monk is able to outwit everybody. It's always been my problem also with Get Out's ending as well, that I have issues with a lot of these endings and these ideas that we have to find wins constantly in these Hollywood movies as Black people, because we need to kind of keep an idea that we can actually keep playing this game within this system, because, you know, we're just going to be the talented 10th will figure it out, you know. So Monk's part of that talented group, and the Daniel Kaluuya's character is part of that talented group in Get Out, and he'll be able to figure it out, and it's part of that.
But
That's
also
why
that
I think
also
the
that
player
talent,
thing.
but also that talented 10th nods at the slave, like you know. I think Michael has said that, but how these people both want to be the talented 10th, but also the most downtrodden. It's
the final girl.
They believe that they are like on this like plantation, but they also believe that they are the anointed. It's like it's the craziest shit ever.
Yeah, it's very Donald Trump. It's mediocre narcissists who view themselves as victims and who bully while viewing themselves as victims.
Fake populists.
I call them narcissistic vampires.
It reminds me of Holden Caulfield syndrome. And this is why, Rich, I was asking you about Catcher in the Rye. I remember reading Catcher in the Rye in high school. I got a scholarship to go off to this prep school in Connecticut. And everybody in the classroom related to Holden Caulfield. And Holden Caulfield would have hated every single motherfucker I went to prep school with. And I was sitting there very confused because I was on the margins. So I could see clearly Holden Caulfield was talking about the people I went to school with. But they all saw themselves in Holden Caulfield, which is to say, there's a fundamental disconnect that narcissism engenders in a person. And I think you see that a bit even in his ideas of art and these mixed metaphors, right? So his whole thing about there's certain kinds of books people write, and then there's certain kinds of scotch people buy. Johnny Walker Red, Black, and Blue. You've been writing Johnny Walker Blue books. And here he conflates inaccessible books that are written by someone with a good intellect to an expensive scotch that only someone with a great deal of money can buy. And it actually just doesn't work, which is very similar to what he's doing with Centaur Golden's rebuttal of Monk's argument. It's just something that doesn't logically work. But the problem is, just like Holden Caulfield syndrome, and this will be the last thing I say, I had a friend once who was incredibly smart, and he could not spot a closeted gay man, ever. He also could not spot a really terrible white person, a terrible white man, a sociopathic white man he was totally blind to. And I'd be sitting there, like, man, you can see everything. I mean, for like 2 years. And then one day it hit me that his brain had to teach him not to see that because he was both of those things. It took me 2 years to understand that the brain sets up a self-defense mechanism where it will not give you insight into the things that you are afraid to admit about yourself. And I think that's why when you see these people creating this art where they miss the point, I don't know anymore if it's cynical or if truly they are locked out of these truths because they have no idea who they are. And that's why they're allowed in their mind to feel both oppressed and special. And it's an insufferable dynamic to see play out in art because it's what Joan Didion kind of took Woody Allen to task with these sort of characters who substitute angst and feeling and quirk for any character, anything that approaches real human life. And that's what you're seeing in a lot of this Black art that's been produced.
Something about the Holden Caulfield thing, I think it's a brilliant comparison, but something else about the Holden Caulfield thing, I think I was lucky in that, well, a backhanded kind of luck. When I went to high school, for whatever reason, I just never got those books that everybody read. And I just felt like I wasn't able to be culturally conversant because I didn't have all the same touchstones as everyone else. So like as an adult, like after law school, I got this Random House top 100 book list. Like the People's Top 100 and the Critics Top 100 of all time. And I just started reading all the books everybody read as a kid. And one thing that kind of surprised me, well, by reading them as an adult, as opposed to like in school as a kid for the first time, I was surprised by how many people didn't actually know books that they read. Like, for example, I was at work and there was a coworker and he was a lawyer and I'm reading Animal Farm. And he goes, "Oh my God, you're reading Animal Farm? It's one of my favorite books." And I was like, yeah, and it's like one of the best, commentaries on, communism I think I've read. I wouldn't say that now, but at the time, that's what I believe. And the guy started looking at me and I started laughing like, "Oh, are you silly Negro?" And he's like, I think you're reading too much into it. It's about a talking pig." And I was like, "No fucking way." I'm like, "You really think that?" And he's like, and he was looking at me like I was a stupid one. And I was like, "No, like you think this book is just about a talking pig?" And like, even if you thought it as a kid, but how is that possible? And I would keep having that, like I'll be excited now I can be culturally conversant. And I would talk to people. I'm like, wow, these people are dumb. And I was thinking like I was the ignorant one. And I keep reading these books or try to talk to these people. So similar with Catcher in the Rye, Holden Caulfield is right about a lot of things, but he's also in a lot of ways the author of his own misery because he doesn't want to handle these problems in a mature way, even though it's sympathetic to him, due to various traumas or whatever. So in his own ways, he kind of can't get out of his own way, and he exacerbates a lot of his own problems, even though he's right about all the phonies. And there's a way in which these people that I think Jason's talking about, because they want to see themselves in Holden Caulfield, they can't see, not only can they not see that Holden Caulfield is critiquing them, but they also can't see that the book has a certain amount of critique for Holden Caulfield as well. Like it can do two things at once. It can hold him up as a very astute observer of the human condition, but also someone who needs to grow and has his own shortcomings. And I think that's the same problem that Ford Jefferson has with Monk. He sees Monk as himself, and Monk is not himself. He probably sees Percival Everett in a way as a kindred spirit, and I don't think that's the case either. But also, he can't see the critique that the book has for Monk. Monk is a sympathetic character, but also an unsympathetic one at the same time. It's what helps makes him human. And to go back to Mtume's point about what he had said, did you guys get the sense that Monk was meant to be a good writer? And I think it's a complicated question because in the book, he's clearly a talented.
He's like a kind of really sharp thinker.
Yeah. He's a very sharp thinker. He's a very sharp writer, but he's not 100% blameless in why his books don't sell. Like he's right about that he's more talented than the people he hates. He's right that Juanita Mae Jenkins' Push analog or Precious analog is crap. But I pulled up the actual excerpt of his novel that we see. I mean, not his novel, his paper that he gives.
He doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence.
No, he doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence. And he's like almost like that autistic guy who bores everyone at the party with his talk about trains or his weird hobby and doesn't realize he's boring people.
Well, he tells the woman that he's fucking that he can't be with her because he don't like the book she's reading.
Yeah.
That's another hilarious satirical thing that tells you so much about who that person is, which is why I think to your earlier point about the movie is that Monk in the movie is just this black hole vacuum of nothing.
Yes.
Everything is swirling around this empty vacuum that you're meant to sort of invest your emotion in the idea that like he's been wronged, but like there's no there.
But see, that's exactly it. Because I think Corey wants to present himself as being wrong.
He's a fucking vacuum of nothing.
Yeah, and so he projects that onto Monk, the book character, the same way a lot of these people project this faultlessness onto Holden Caulfield. But this is an excerpt of Monk's writing from the book. I'm not gonna read the whole thing because 1 or 2 paragraphs gives you, but it's very pretentious and impenetrable. It's like F/V, placing the experimental novel, F/V, a novel excerpt. And this is supposed to be the excerpt from a novel, I guess. Number 1, S/Z, asterisk. The title perhaps answers any questions before it is raised, making it in some sense an anti-title, but a title nonetheless, thus offering the suggestion of negation. So, is the title the name of a work or the name of a mere shadow of a work? In establishing its own subject, ostensibly Balzac's Saracen, it raises the question of whether that text is indeed its subject. And of course it is not, as S/Z tells us. Its subject is the elusive model of that thing which Saracen might be argued to be a representation. Like Barth, let us designate as hermeneutic code, parentheses, HER, quote, all the units whose function is to articulate in various ways a question, its response, and the variety of chance events which can either formulate the question or delay its answer, semicolon, or even constitute an enigma and lead to its solution. The S/end quote, the S/Z refers no doubt to the unvoiced and voiced, but the enigma pales in consideration of the slash which separates them. And it goes on and on and on for like pages. And you can imagine Monk droning on with this thing that's only accessible to like 3 people on the planet. Like it's so inside baseball and in the weeds. Like it's gonna appeal to like basically nobody. So you get to see, okay, so he's not just this noble, great writer who's being overlooked. He's partially right. Crap is getting published over talented, intelligent stuff, but he's also has no commercial instinct. And like Percival Everett, you could tell this is not just a lazy analog of Percival Everett, because Percival Everett, as experimental as he is, never writes this boring or impenetrable or pretentious. You know, there's a distance between Monk and Percival Everett that Corey Jefferson can't allow with himself in Monk. And what made it really funny and absurdist is after all those paragraphs of impenetrable potential gibberish, someone in the audience manages to get offended. I think part of the joke is that there's no way you can be offended by this because this is not referring to anybody or anything real. But somebody shakes his fist and goes, "You bastard!" And then Monk says, "I could tell immediately that he hadn't understood a word of what I had read." But he was eager to appear as though comprehension had quickly come to him. So this guy is acting mad because he doesn't want to admit that he has no idea what Monk is talking about. But it's not fully just a critique of the guy; it's a critique of Monk. Monk is like Holden Caulfield, somebody who's right about what he observes, but also simultaneously has his own blind spots about himself and can't get out of his own way to address his own problems with the phonies.
And then he tells the guy that he needs to get laid. And then when Monk is literally, his dick is inside of this woman, he sees this book on her nightstand and it's like, you're reading that? I mean, genius. Genius. Yeah. And American fiction can't even conceive of something that brilliant. That kind of humor.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask Rich a question, because one of the things that I think about is that in some ways this is metafiction, right? Where it is super self-aware, where Everett has put together what I would argue is possibly like a Nobel Prize, winning collection of fiction, none of which resembles his one identity novel. And it seems like the point is when you assert yourself too much in fiction and you get trapped too much by identity forward writing, that you inevitably will erase yourself no matter how good it is, right? And we see that it's so brilliant that he does make money off of the book eventually, and they totally erase what he wrote in the film. But I know you've articulated some things about what the novel really means and says that I think we're even beyond some of my insights. And I'm just curious as to how you view this book in terms of the title of Erasure and how this ties into what has happened with the film and the actual writing, what the purpose of the
it's funny because this is making me think back to a conversation we were having earlier about what erasure is. I think that question came up earlier. And so in the novel, actually, because if you don't mind, I'll read from a passage.
Please do.
So this is the end of my pathology. And so this is when Van Gogh's in this talk show and he's trapped by his baby mamas, and the cops come in because he sexually assaulted somebody, and he gets roped into appearing on the show, and really it's just getting him arrested. And so at the very last paragraph of the novel, My Pathology, Van Gogh saying, "The cops be laughing. Airbag, dumb fuck. You dumb fuck." One says to me, "I looks up and sees the cameras. I get kicked again while I've been pulling to my feet, but I don't care. The camera is pointing at me. I be on the TV. The cameras be full of me. I on TV, I say. Hey, mama, I say. Hey, baby girl, look at me. I'm on TV." But see, the end of the novel, this is now, erasure, right? This is when Monk is at the end of his narrative, when he walks up to the stage to accept the award for the novel that he also wrote as Stagger Lee. He says, "I looked at the mirror, still held by the boy. He held it by his thigh, and I could only imagine the image the glass held." Because at the end of the novel, Monk is hallucinating. He's seeing all these people in his life. He sees his sister, right? It's this incredibly surreal moment when Stagger Lee and Monk kind of begin to merge. Because throughout the novel, that's what's happening. All of a sudden, Monk is losing himself in this nom de plume, right? He's just am I Stagger Lee or am I Monk? And the last sentence is, "I choose one of the TV cameras and stared into it. I said, egads, I'm on television," right? And so that's Monk's ending to the book. But it completely mirrors to it, not completely. It is very close to Van Gogh's ending, right? And so to the point about erasure, I think we're all talking around this. It's the novel is suggesting to a certain extent that these narratives swallow us up, but I'm not sure if Everett is necessarily like the movie does, holding up the sense of the principled moral writer against this. In the novel, they're subsumed within each other. And that's where the full force of the satire is. The inability to escape that no matter what, right? That Monk is seemingly swallowed by Stagger Lee. Whereas in the movie, you don't get the sense that Monk becomes the thing he least wants to be, right? And the film kind of allows some space where him and his brother, in fact, share this kind of moment of self-recognition with each other. They can drive off, they made the money, their integrity's in place. Whereas in the novel, that is not the sense you're left with at the end of the book.
And I totally agree about his integrity being in place. I had some people try to tell me that they didn't think that was supposed to be the message, but I'm that's why he's nodding at the slave actor. He really is trying to say that, they're both just doing the best they can. And yeah, I totally agree with you that the movie wants to say his integrity is in place.
But even in the movie, his integrity is compromised because of the other people's lack of sophistication. It's not. They do
That's
not.
a good point.
They do not indict him. Now, I will say it's been a while, but back to what Richard said, when I read the book, my feeling that I got was this is an immoral world. I actually didn't get that at all. Kind of like when you were wondering, I was like, I remember when I got that, I was like, oh, this world is just immoral, and that the reason why Staggar Lee will then come and basically take over this body is because that's what the world demands. So that's why I said when I read that book and it like haunted the shit out of me, it's wild. But this is also what's really sad to me, because listening to y'all talk about the book from this kind of, critical perspective as scholars of the book, it's wild because like there is a tradition in cinema of these kinds of movies. If you think about Persona by Bergman, right? The two people merging. Mulholland Drive by David Lynch, right? You have a long tradition of the dual person. Nostalgia by Tarkovsky, the people connected, and then what happens? They merge into one, or one takes one over. It is a long tradition in cinema to do this, and it's so upsetting to me that Jefferson would take this novel and then see that what is possible out there, and then avoid things like and then not avoid things like melodrama, moralism, and it's the liberalism that lives in this movie. It's just it's a liberal take on Black existence, and it erases, you're right, Everett's work.
I mean, the eraser is Cord. He like there is no that here. Like it's literally like the reason why I keep coming back to that word is because Jeffrey Wright is a really great actor. Like in general, like if you objectively, he's a great actor. And I found myself while watching a movie being like, I know Jeffrey Wright is a great actor, and yet in this character, I am unmoved by anything that he's doing. And I felt 100%. Like it doesn't have anything to do with his skills or ability. He had literally nothing to work with. There was no subtext to draw on. There was nothing. And so he's just this thing, this little object you're watching march through this narrative that is about the actual subject of the film, which is this director-writer, a director-writer who cannot face himself at all. So you're watching like a literal like blank space move through a narrative that can't see itself. And to me, that's the erasure.
Something that Mtume said that just caused like a click in me when you didn't use these words, I'm paraphrasing, but you kind of implied that Jefferson is not a student of cinema because he's missing all these movies that touch on this stuff better. And I kind of even realized like he started out as a journalist and someone who worked for Gawker and was on the DC journalism scene. And I kind of realized, he talks about making the jump from screenwriting to directing and how casually he treats it. And I just kind of realized in a certain way, he's probably the same with jumping from journalism and blogging to screenwriting. Like, forget about his jump from screenwriting to directing, but even screenwriting, someone probably had a similar talk with him. Someone's like, he was probably like, the journalism bag is getting old. They want me to write about Black Lives Matter and Trayvon Martin all day, which he had an article about. He kind of took his career to the next level, talking about protests and the Black condition. And then after a little while, he started writing articles complaining that's all people want him to write about, which I'm like, but you can't have it both ways. You took advantage, and now that it's kind of drying up, now you're complaining that now this is something that white people are foisting on you or burdening you with, when you took that ball and ran with it. But yeah, I kind of realized he's not only a screenwriter that doesn't really have the training and background to be directing, but he's also like a journalist who doesn't really have the position to be in the screenwriting in the first place. Not saying that he can't do it if he took it seriously, but I just feel like he just kind of wants to put these notches in his belt, and it really, like, no one's telling him his limitations, and he's either not admitting them or whatever. But yeah, there's multiple levels he needs to get to before he's ready to do something like this. But
I mean, I'll say one thing about screenwriting though. It's kind of sad because screenwriting has kind of been reduced to a kind of like honestly workman's formula. You get Sid Field's book. I mean, literally will tell you, there's a big screenplay contest that literally says on it, screenwriting is not an art form.
Yeah.
Right. They literally say stuff like that. So I could see him.
It's like a flowchart.
Believing in that. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that in there.
Oh, one of the ironies about these people, right? The way that he talks about directing, these people, because they think of writing as this kind of almost like priestly caste that's like very sacred in a kind of comical way. A lot of these people, which I hold writing in high regard, but I find some of the people who are some of the most glib or middle of the road writers are the ones who talk the most about how sacred writing is. These Hollywood writers talk the most about how bad AI is and what an insult it is to the profession. But the way he talks about directing, how is it any different than how these studio people talk about replacing writing with AI? Like, he should love AI. He basically says, yeah, just get a bunch of people to do the technical stuff. You just come in with the idea. Well, that's what people do with Chat GPT. Hey, I have an idea. I'm going to feed it into this prompt, and the machine's going to take care of all this technical stuff for me. Like, he might be against it, and all these writers might be against it in theory because they don't want to be out of work. But the way they treat screenwriting, like, hey, I'll just plug my idea into this formula, and I'll come out with a screenplay on the other side. I'll just plug my idea into a bunch of cinematographers, and that's directing. It's not in process any different than how you create with ChatGPT.
I was thinking of something that Michael said about Jeffrey Wright being a good actor. I think one of the benefits that I have is I don't watch movies and TV anymore. And I did watch a lot of it growing up. So I do have some basic sense of what good acting is, right? But I don't know who these people are, so I have no bias. And so I could tell like Sterling Brown is magnetic, but there's nothing for Sterling Brown to work with except to be magnetic and attractive. Same with Monk, right? So what you're saying about his TV background stood out to me because there was this thing that I associate with mediocre sitcoms happening where like the finer points of plot and character development are kind of sacrificed for a zinger that flatters the audience's delusion. And that doesn't give Monk or Jeffrey Wright much to work with. He's just kind of like a mopey guy, whereas in the book, he's not that, as Michael was pointing out. And Sterling Brown's character is like, they kind of play him in the most cliche gay way. Whereas like the thing is he's difficult to wrestle with, Cliff, in the book, because he's such a miserable son of a bitch.
Yeah. and I feel like he was kind of cliched gay in the book as well, but it was because he had so little self-knowledge. Like, it was part of the joke. Like, it was cliched on purpose, as in he wants to be true to himself as a gay person, but he can't imagine what am I really as a gay person. Instead, he just tries to like check off some boxes of what I think a stereotypical gay person should be. You know what I mean? And I feel like Cord keeps running from stuff that he's afraid. Like, for example, Satire or Juanita Mae Jenkins in the book, there's nothing that in Everett's prose that to me suggests that he thinks Juanita Mae Jenkins, the author of We Lives in the Ghetto, is bad because she's a black woman, or that he's making any commentary about black women being sellouts or whatever. But Cord, I think, is so paranoid about not being liked that he defends against things that aren't even there yet, just in case. So he has to make Juanita Mae Jenkins have a classier name and redeem her and make her not so bad and call out misogynoir and all this stuff in any critique of her. Similarly, I think he was afraid of, he renders my pathology so unfunny. And in the novel, it's really funny because Everett goes for it. He goes full minstrel and he goes page after page. When you hear Rich read that excerpt, it's just hilarious. And it's like, Cord, in that case, also doesn't trust the audience. He's like, oh, if I really go there with my rendition of my pathology, then white people might think something. Or maybe, he's afraid to let himself write the full minstrelsy. So it's like, what he shows is very unfunny. It's like Black Lady sketch show type of unfunny. It's just very, I don't know. Did you guys laugh once when, he had Keith David, acting out? Yeah,
I don't even think it's played. Is it played for laughs though? I mean, the way
I think he thinks it's funny.
It's played for like
offense. Like, can you believe
Yeah.
that he's making us do this? Because he even has the characters be like, you really want us to say that?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense within the construct of what he's making in that moment. And another thing, just because, like,
Look, can you just hold the thought real quick? What you just said about, are we really going to say that? I think it's another way that he wants to let the audience know, just so you guys know, I don't think this is good. Like he's so afraid of the audience ascribing any malice to him. Like Percival Everett doesn't have that in his novel within a novel because he trusts the audience. And that line, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I just had to jump in that line. That's a perfect example of his kind of fear of everything. He's so afraid to not be liked. Are we really gonna have us say that? It's like, you don't have to have that there. Like, trust the audience that they know that this is.
It's like when a white actor is playing a racist, but they're not doing it well because they want everyone to know that they're still not a racist.
That's not me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Michael, but finish your thought.
No, I was just gonna say, like, just again, because the book just blew my mind so much, is to me, what my reading of My Pathology as just a piece of writing, he even as Monk like tries to like make it be bad, it's actually quite brilliant, and it's better, and it actually is better than We's Lives in the Ghetto. And just reading it, like, you can just feel Monk like trying to do it, but he can't. But he can't do it, and it's that nuance. It's like that level of nuance.
Ironically, it's also better than his real writing as himself.
It's better than his real writing. I wanted to know. I wanted to know what the fuck was going to happen to Van Gogh. Like when he like fucked the white girl, or the what's it, white girl?
She's black. No,
she's black. It's a black girl. Yeah. When he fucked a black girl, and like when he like the chase, I was like riveted. I wanted to know what the fuck was going to happen. Even as Monk has contempt for it, it still was interesting. I think that's what he is, a character. When it takes off, that's part of the shame and the irony that he feels of like, I made something that I fucking hate that people fucking love. And it's realer. That is so much realer in the book than it is in the movie.
He seemed to be slanging too, by the way. He was such a mopey loser in search of love. Like, he was knocking down a chick at the conference, and then he was done with her and he dismissed her. He was knocking down this chick.
What's what I mean about
It's not a sad sack in the way that they portray him whatsoever.
This is all the doubling and the repetition in the novel. Yeah. And the other thing is, in talking about the fear of Court Jefferson and offending anybody, in the novel, like, obviously Sapphire and Push is the target, but My Pathology is Native Son. Like, that's the narrative of Native Son. Van Gogh is bigger and he works for this rich family, but in the novel, in Native Son, it's a white family, but in My Pathology, it's a bourgeois black family. Oh, they're not bourgeois, they're wealthy.
Yeah.
And he takes, I can't remember the daughter's name, and her boyfriend to the hood and exposes them to all this like hood stuff. Like, it's all black people in My Pathology. So he's reversing a lot of the kind of like the sensationalism of Wright's novel in 1942 and recasting or sort of rewriting the characters to all be black. And so, like, even in the novel, like, he's doubling down on some of this critique, right?
That's a great observation.
And daring the reader to kind of say, well, what do you do now when Bigger Thomas is raping a black woman, basically, and this famine is black?
Two black women.
Two black, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And can you guys picture Court Jefferson depicting a rape? He would not dare. Even if it's to make a point, like, he's just.
He couldn't even depict a woman working at an abortion clinic. A character's sister.
Oh, wait! Did she even work in an abortion? I know he didn't want to show her getting shot.
No, she was
a doctor.
I feel like they were. I feel like it wasn't. It was like maybe a general.
Obliquely, they kind of.
She was a doctor, but
she was a doctor. Like, it wasn't. Yeah. Specified.
Yeah. Maybe he's afraid to offend pro-life people. Yeah, he's so afraid of his own shadow. He's like a groundhog.
But I also think structure.
And I bet he also, because he has this whole thing about, well, I don't want to show stereotypical depictions, because in the book the sister is shot by somebody, so he probably felt like, oh, I don't want to show a black woman being shot through like gun violence, or that would be like a traumatic image or idea for the audience to deal with.
In a weird way, he was probably afraid to offend pro-life people too, like, because he has a very milquetoast type of liberalism, I think. So it's like, there's good right-wing people, there's good pro-choice people who just believe.
No, in the novel, in the movie, movie, it's called Boston Family Planning. So the inference is that it's an abortion clinic or some kind of but it's called family planning. But in the novel, his sister's shot by like a wackadoodle anti-abortionist.
I'm sure he's afraid. It's the same way, like, Hillary Clinton's like, well, there's good Republicans and bad Republicans, and Donald Trump's a bad one. I feel like he probably was like, I don't want to imply all pro-life people are murderers.
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if that milquetoast.
But there's another way where I think a lot of these omissions are about how Hollywood wants particular structures in their movies. Because if you look at a lot of these things that happen in the novel, they're like these little like sharp points that kind of like pump out, right? And like they don't really get answers. And Hollywood movies don't like that. They need everything tied up. The more there's loose ends to Monk's life, the more he's hard to basically grasp and control and mold into a way that they need him to be, and also be able to dictate to an audience. The novel, he has so many weird fractures and bumps and things and curvatures that they have to smooth all that out. They can't have that stuff. And this is Hollywood movie making. It's Hollywood melodrama. It's hero's journey shit, which is just wild to me that he made a hero's journey movie out of a book that is the complete antithesis of that kind of journey.
So I didn't get a chance to play those clips of Ford Jefferson, but I do want to play while you guys are here. I think we could fit it in real quick. I want to play the conversation with Santara Golden. I think it's short enough, but it's just so crazy. I think that's a good place to end it. If anyone wants to put their last words on that, we'll do it that way. So we had technical difficulties with getting the sound to play through the speakers for the other guests to hear. So I wasn't able to actually play it for them in real time, but I'm inserting it retroactively at this point for the purpose of the audience. The guests all saw the movie, so we all knew the scene in question, but I wanted to have a insertion of the scene in the episode for listeners at home. And what I decided to do was rip it from the DVD, but with the audio description. So there's going to be a voice narrating what you see on the screen to help give you context. So the narrator that you hear talking is not going to be what you would have heard if you go watch the movie in the theaters or on streaming or whatever. That's just a special feature that the DVD has that I thought would be beneficial to the audience. So first, we're going to play the scene where Monk, the protagonist, played by Jeffrey Wright, first discovers Issa Rae's Santara Golden and her novel, We Lives in the Ghetto. And he discovers it at a book festival where he's on a panel that is sparsely attended with 3 other people, and no one's really at the panel, and it's very light attendance, and it's dark and dingy room. And then he gets told that everybody is at Santara Golden, who he has never heard of up until this point. Everyone is at her panel instead. So he learns that and decides to go over to Santara Golden's panel and discovers the book, and that's the context for this scene.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you to our authors, and thanks to all of you for attending.
Monk turns to the man next to him.
It's just me, or was this small even for a book festival?
Yeah, it's because we're up against Santara.
Who?
Santara Golden. You haven't read her?
No, what's her book called?
A large poster reads, Weez Lives in the Ghetto by Sinatra Golden. He enters a large room.
The London Review of Books said, Weez Lives in the Ghetto is a heartbreaking and visceral debut. Plus, a little birdie told me that perhaps there's a TV adaptation in the works.
No comment.
Okay, it was worth a shot. Tell us, what was your life like before you were an author?
Well, I did undergrad at Oberlin and moved to New York the day after graduation. And a couple months later, I was an assistant at a publisher.
And did that assistant experience shape your writing?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was a first reader, meaning I would read all the manuscripts in the slush pile and send them up the ladder if they were any good. Some of them were great. Most were not.
Monk stands at the back.
But the feeling I couldn't shake was that no matter how good the books were, most every submission was from some white dude from New York going through a divorce, and too few of them were about my people. And so I think Where are our stories? Where's our representation? And it was from that lack that my book was born.
Would you give us the pleasure of reading an excerpt?
Thank you. Yo, Sharonda.
Monk's brow furrows.
Where you be going in a hurry like that? Donna asked me when she seed me coming out the house. Ain't none your business, but if and you gots to know, I's going to the pharmacy. I looks back at the door to see if mama coming out. The pharmacy? What for? She asks. You know, I says. Nah, she say. Hell nah. Girl, you be pregnant again? Mights be, I tells her. And if I is, Ray Ray is gonna be a real father this time around.
His brows knit together.
Thank you.
A pale gray-haired woman in the audience springs to her feet. The rest of the crowd follows suit. Monk stares around disconsolately. His eyes dart around.
Okay, so now y'all have heard the Satire Golden introduction, and you also heard how the book actually sounds from her reading. And Cord Jefferson didn't really change that from the novel. It's pretty much exactly how it appears in the novel. The novel sounds exactly like that. So in the book Erasure by Percival Everett, Satire Golden is called something like Juanita Mae Jenkins, and the book is still called, I believe, We Lives in the Ghetto, but I double-checked, to make sure, and what Issa Rae was reading right there was pretty much exactly, almost word for word, how Percival Everett put the satirical novel in the book Erasure. So now that we have that context, this next scene is Monk and Satire Golden both ending up on the same book awards panel judging books. So they're the only two black people on this panel. Everyone else is white. And while this happens, Monk's book, his fake book, My Pathology, aka Fuck, that he wrote under the pen name Stagger Lee, comes up to be judged. And that's the context for this next scene.
Let's talk about fuck.
Could we not?
Personally, I adored it. Oh, it was like gazing into an open wound.
I agree. I think it's the strongest African-American novel I've read in a long time.
Monk cringes.
I mean, since yours, of course, Sintara.
Thank you.
I actually liked it much more than I was expecting. I mean, this is a gutsy piece of work and necessary for the times.
Now, what did you think, Sintara?
Her eyes widen.
I found it to be pretty pandering, actually.
You did?
Yes. Did you not?
I very much did. I thought it was simplistic and meaningless.
Well, of course it was simplistic. I mean, it's the language of the gutter. Not some prissy graduate thesis.
Language of the gutter, Jesus Christ.
I think our blood sugar's low. How about we take a break for lunch? Huh?
Fine by me.
Okay.
Really?
The rest of the judges leave the conference room. Monk wearily closes a notebook. Now, he returns to the conference room holding a lunch container. Sinatra is reading and eating sushi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine.
But I'm not interrupting?
No.
She's reading a book titled White Negroes. Monk sets his lunch down across from her and sits down. He shakes his container of salad. She glances up.
Sorry. Do you mind if I ask you something?
Sure.
What about fuck did you find pandering?
Oh, I can't really put my finger on it, but it's not different from some of what's out there, but it just felt...
She stares off for a moment.
soulless is the word that I'm gonna use. You said you agreed, right?
Yeah, I do. I think it seems written to satisfy the tastes of guilt-ridden white people.
Yeah, the kind of book critics call important and necessary, but not well written.
Exactly.
He grins to himself, looking down at his salad.
Okay, so, please don't take offense at this, but how is fuck so very different from your book?
Her eyebrows raise.
Is that what this is about? You think my book's trash?
No, to be honest, I haven't read your book. I've read excerpts, and it didn't seem so dissimilar.
I did a lot of research for my book. Some of it was actually taken from real interviews. Maybe you've been up in your ivory tower of academia for so long you've forgotten that some people's lives are hard.
Your life? You went to an exclusive bohemian college. You had a job at a fancy publishing house in New York.
So what? I don't need to write about my life. I write about what interests people.
Well, you write what interests white publishers fiending black trauma porn.
They're the one buying the manuscripts. Is it bad to cater to their tastes?
If you're okay feeding people's base desires for profit.
I'm okay with giving the market what it wants.
That's how drug dealers excuse themselves.
And I think drugs should be legal.
He frowns. He fidgets awkwardly.
But you're not fed up with it. You're black people in poverty, black people rapping, black people as slaves, black people murdered by the police. Whole soaring narratives about black folks in dire circumstances who still manage to maintain their dignity before they die. I mean, I'm not saying these things aren't real, but we're also more than this. And it's like so many writers like you can't envision us without some white boot on our necks.
Do you get angry at Bret Easton Ellis or Charles Bukowski for writing about the downtrodden? Or is your ire strictly reserved for black women?
Nobody reads Bukowski thinking his is the definitive white experience, but white people read your book and confine us to it. They think that we're all like that.
Then it sounds like your issue is with white people, Monk, not me.
Well, maybe, but I also think that I see the unrealized potential of black people in this country.
Potential is what people see when they think what's in front of them isn't good enough.
He stares at her, brow furrowing slightly. Aileen enters, carrying her lunch.
So, what are we talking about?
Monk sits in an ornate stairwell.
Now, you hear the narrator at the end, the DVD track narrator, describe Monk sitting in a stairway by himself. He's sitting in that stairway alone with his thoughts quietly, basically because Santara's argument was just so boom. He was kind of floored and he had to reconsider everything. So he's just sitting there just thinking like, damn, and it's kind of funny because it's just not a good argument, which we're going to get into when we start talking about the scene amongst the rest of when we go back to the conversation. You're going to see why, but I just wanted to throw that in there for the necessary context to understand what we're going to talk about next. One thing I'll say before we return back to the conversation that I forgot to mention during the main conversation is that they do a very slick bait and switch, a changing of the argument, because they go from talking about the book being bad and, what it does for black stories. And at some point, the conversation switches to black people being bad. So Monk goes from they go from talking about the book and then Santara, to allow her to win the argument, Cord Jefferson makes Santara, without you realizing it, shift from talking about stories to people. So what Monk really should have meant was black stories have more potential than this. But instead, Cord has him say black people have more potential than. The reason why that makes no sense as a discussion point for Monk is that Monk does not believe that the book, at least I don't think he believes it from what I've seen from him in the movie, Monk does not believe that the book accurately represents black people. So for Monk to think that black stories have more potential than what is in Santara's book should not by inference mean that Monk also thinks black people have more potential than what's in the book. The only reason why it would be offensive to black people for Monk to not like Santara's book is if everybody implicitly understands the book to be accurate about black people. Like if the book is actually accurate in its depiction of black people, then yes, Monk bashing the book and bashing the subjects in the book and, bashing the stories described in the book as not living up to potential would in fact be Monk saying those exact same things about actual black people. But what Cord Jefferson seems to be saying by presenting Santara's argument so sympathetically is he seems to be agreeing that her research that she says she did in the book and whatever leads to a book that she made that actually accurately represents black people. And at that point, the argument just unravels to me about the movie because whatever argument this movie's trying to make, because if you come down on the side that this book accurately represents black people to the point that having a problem with this book somehow means you have a problem with black people, if the book is accurate, then I don't understand what the premise of the movie even is. Is it that We Lives in the Ghetto is an accurate depiction of black life and vernacular and jargon and whatever? Is that excerpt that Satire was reading in the beginning that we were clearly meant to laugh at, was that actually meant to be considered an accurate depiction of black people? Because if so, why is it clearly depicted as something for us to laugh at? If Monk thinking less of the book is supposed to be a sign that he thinks less of black people, because by implication, that argument implies that the book accurately represents black people, then in that case, Cord presenting the dialogue of the book, Cord Jefferson, the director and screenwriter, presenting the dialogue of the book as something for us, the audience, to laugh at must mean that he, and by assumption, the audience, like to laugh at authentic black people. Why is he presenting that language as something for us to crack up about and to be a comedic beat? If it's supposed to represent black people accurately, unless he is saying, hey, this is how black people accurately speak and talk and think and live, and isn't it funny? Which I don't think is what Erasure wanted to do. And I don't think it's even what Cord Jefferson wanted to do, guys. I just think he doesn't have a cohesive idea of what is supposed to be happening and what he believes. I think he just kind of lives moment to moment. So that's why he contradicts himself. Like narratively, he lives moment. And I think it's also kind of disturbing that the terribleness of the book is, of Santara's book within a book, We Lives in the Ghetto, is preserved accurately from Everett's novel, but he adds apologia or excuses or justification or a kind of redemption of that same book that was being critiqued in Erasure that is solely from Cord Jefferson. That both sidesness, that defense of We Lives in the Ghetto is not actually in Erasure. So he kind of undermines even Percival Everett's novel in that edition, because I did not get the idea that Percival Everett, thought that We Lives in the Ghetto had redeeming qualities. So anyway, with that context, please enjoy the rest of the conversation. That speech with Santara Golden, it's so confused. Santara Golden's Issa Rae's character. So to set the scene, they both just finished trashing Monk's fake book, not knowing that Monk wrote it. And she agrees with Monk. She goes, it's a pandering book, it's this and that. And then Monk pretty much asks her, hey, I don't get it, no offense, but how is this book that you agree with me is terrible, which is secretly his own book, how is it any worse than what you do? When she does a series of defenses that just make no sense and are so cynical about giving the audience what they want and blaming the white people who buy the books and not the black people. But if that's the case, she never answers the question, why is my pathology not okay then, if it's because it's doing the same thing? Like, it makes no sense. All her defenses work as defenses of the book she just finished trashing. But it's just something that I think especially makes no sense. She goes and tells him, and it shuts him up, and it drives me crazy. I had a friend who used to call this the Brody slap in movies. In Jaws, Schneider's character is called Brody, and this woman blames him for the shark and slaps him. But it's one of the few bad parts of the movie. The argument is so stupid. There's no way that he could be blamed for the shark. And they called it, and my friend called it a Brody slap. Whenever somebody wins an argument with a moment that's supposed to shut the protagonist or somebody up, but the argument makes no sense, but the protagonist is cowed as if it does and is humbled by it, they calls it a Brody slap. And this is such a Brody slap. She goes, oh, so do you feel that way all the time? Or do you just feel that way when it's by a black woman? And he's the same thing. Oh, am I just bashing We Lives in the Ghetto just because it's by a black woman? And the reason it makes no sense is 5 minutes before, we just saw him in a room bash My Pathology, written by Stagger Lee. So she has proof right in front of her that he doesn't just say this when it's about a black woman, because he just did it 5 minutes ago with a black book. And all Monk had to say is, that's obviously not true because I hate this book. And it's by a man called Stagger Lee. But instead, Monk is sitting in the stairwell like, oh my God, she really showed me something. I was like, oh my God, this guy can't even keep track of his own movie. This happened 5 minutes ago.
And then he has to go in his like fake ending, maybe go apologize to Erica Alexander.
Yeah, ridiculous.
Or being mad about not liking her book, or at her for liking My Pathology.
Oh, I'm gonna ask you guys a question. In the book, I can't remember this. I forgot to double check. The Erica Alexander character in the book, isn't she reading We Lives in the Ghetto? But in the book, he changed it to My Pathology.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Now that makes no sense because I thought the same thing. Because how could My Pathology come out that fast and be a bestseller to the point that Erica Alexander has it in her hands? It makes more sense.
Oh, the movie deals with time terribly as a whole.
In the movie, doesn't she read both of them?
In the movie, she only reads "fuck" or My Pathology, but there's no way the timeline it could be a bestseller enough. It's still being
and also be nominated for a book award.
Yeah, because I think in the book it's not even it's on its way to being published or is just published. You know, So just in terms of basic craft, Jefferson just misses a lot. That I think as a more seasoned screenwriter and director, he'd be,
But see, the other thing is that when he sees her reading that, that's what inspires him to write My Pathology. So not only does he substitute what book is being critiqued, but the entire inspiration for him losing his mind is then altered in the process. I want to say one last thing about the dead mother in the closet. Do you know this concept from Baldwin's Notes for a Hypothetical Novel? This is what that reminded me of. Baldwin's whole thing was discourse in America is like going over to your homeboy's house and he killed his mother and she's in the closet. And the thing is, you don't want to talk about it because that's very uncomfortable. But the problem is every bit of conversation in all American discourse becomes avoidance of and aversion to the truth because we have to talk around the dead mother in the closet. And that's what that felt like. The movie felt like that, and specifically that scene. It's like, this is going to be incoherent because on a fundamental level, the film refuses to engage the real issues that the film should be attacking. So of course it's not going to make sense.
Well, I mean, think about this. Why do white people, why do white liberals, why are they so enthusiastic to agree with the premise of this movie and Cord's arguments in interviews that there's supposedly too many slave movies and too many urban blight movies, in favor of black professional class? That's because slavery and the hood are two mothers in the closet, So white people, they'd love to not talk about slavery anymore. They'd love to not, because they got to talk about reparations. They'd love to talk about urban blight. They'd love to not talk about urban blight because then they got to talk about material redistribution. But black professional class feeling microaggressions, yeah, they could do that. They can do that all day long. So I feel like, just like you said, like those are two mothers in the closet that they don't want to talk about. Yeah, there's no stakes.
And that makes this movie, and this is what's fucked about this movie, it makes it the flip side of the same fucking coin as Precious, which is to say you can go into Precious and watch it, and this woman is obese, hideous, has a mentally disabled child, is raped by her father and abused by her mother. You don't have to think about why there is poverty and dysfunction in Harlem. It lets you off the hook. And this movie similarly lets everyone in the audience off the hook because there's nothing, that ain't me. I'm not that director. The problem is the black people making these niggerish movies. That's the problem.
And I would to piggyback on that, I think that there actually is a real argument to be made about why did we get these depictions? But like, again, it goes back to these depictions are always really just a Trojan horse for bougie black issues. Yeah. And so my issue is not like, why are there so many slavery movies or why are there so many trauma, harm, whatever. It's that why are these things presented as a form of entertainment that is masquerading as history, as politics, as any of these things when it's really just a kind of plug and play Instagram filter for class obsession.
But also, how many slave movies and gangster movies really are there in existence? Like, everybody keeps acting like there's so many of them, but the fact that you can only name the same 2 or 3 slave movies or the same 2 or 3 gangster movies, like we made a list as an exercise to list all the black shows and movies we could think of the past 10 years, and very few of them, there were like maybe 2 slave movies, and one of them wasn't even a real slave movie in the past 10 years. It was Antebellum, which ended up being like a fake out. It's not even real slavery. Even in rap, there's not gangsters anymore. Like the number one guy is a Jewish kid from Toronto. Like you can't even be gangster in rap anymore, much less in movies and TV. Like Power universe is maybe the only real thing I could think of. So it's just kind of, I think it's kind of phony, this idea that I think even at the peak of Boys in the Hood and Menace to Society, I still think even then slave movies and gangster movies are very, very exaggerated. And that's the last thing I'll say.
Yeah.
I'll let you guys give your final thoughts.
I got one last thing, which kind of picking it back what Jason was saying about, these movies not addressing material conditions. I mean, that is the core essence of Hollywood melodrama, that everything is self-fixable. It has to do with you as an individual has to, have a better perspective or find that key incredible part of yourself, become a superhero, become Captain America, find your greatest self, so forth and so on, or become Miss Marvel or whatever like that. And that is the key. They don't want you to analyze material conditions, the greatest things, and even actually also question yourself and question how you are going about in the world and how you're actually participating in the social world that exists. They don't see us as they don't want to see us as social animals. They want to see us as individualists who need to maximize ourselves individually, and then that helps the whole project of America and brand culture and so forth and so on. So yeah, I mean, exactly. That's all. That was really the last thing that I wanted to say.
Hey, do you mind if I email you about something, Mtume?
For sure. Anytime, brother, please.
No doubt.
Anyone else have any final thoughts? I gave mine. Mtume gave his before we close it up.
Read Erasure, people.
Yeah, for sure.
They left out the best part of the novel for me. My favorite moment in American fiction was when Cliff left a note for him in the dresser drawer and said, "This note will explain everything."
Yes.
Said, "Fuck you," because I want to leave that note for the motherfuckers who made this film.
Or in the novel, like his sister's cousin is a neo-Nazi. Like that novel just has some insane stuff in it. Like the father's affair. He has his daughter, and the daughter is, resents Monk. Like she's. I mean, it's like that whole scene when he meets his white family. Yeah, like it's just so insane.
They're poor, and he looks at them the way that you would think white people would look at black people.
Exactly.
But everything.
But he's so afraid of indicting the black professional class. That's why
exactly right.
He totally takes out the class tension with the maid. The maid is just a loving, and that's exactly what white people do to black help. White people present the so-called mammy as someone who loves being part of the rich family, and he does the same thing. He mammifies that character.
She comes up with a lantern at some point. You know the scene when he comes in the house and turns the powers off? I was like, dog, how's she gonna come out with a lantern? Like, what is this?
Oh,
like,
she was such
well,
a
man. After Hollywood loved Roma, you shouldn't be surprised.
I never saw Roma.
Man, Roma will piss you off, man. My grandmother, who was a domestic worker, I watched that movie. I was so fucking pissed off at how they made this domestic worker's life, how much she serves these people who are basically exploiting her. It's one of the most disgusting movies I've ever seen in my life. So they have no problem with that. Not in Hollywood.
Okay, guys, thanks so much. I appreciate everyone for staying a couple minutes past their hard stop. It's not unappreciated. Thanks so much. And everybody have a good one, and we'll talk soon. This was real.
Peace, y'all.
Pleasure. Care y'all.
Later.